Emily said, we're trying to get Valerie on. She did a lot of planning for this section on planning, but we're gonna extend some grace, but we're also gonna be very cognizant and aware of y'all's time and your time commitment. So we're just gonna go ahead and get started. So like Emily said, I'm gonna start us off, but be ready to start giving out that grace as yes, I did not fully intentionally plan this, someone else did, but we're gonna run with it and it's gonna be great and we're gonna learn a lot about planning. So yeah, we'll get started. So first off, I just wanted to kind of start off by just kind of get an idea of or y'all's thoughts on like planning in general. So like why do we plan for sessions? Why do we plan for anything in life? What are just some like thoughts about like why do we plan in general? Or if you have any ideas of like why we plan for a session, that as well. Feel free to raise your hand. If you have some ideas, you can also drop them in the chat, but y'all already know we love some microphone answers. Tiffany, go for it.
Probably gonna sound cheesy, but that line, failure to prepare is preparing to fail. I feel like if I don't prepare, I get anxiety, and like sometimes you can do well still, but it's you can't go in with confidence knowing for sure that you're gonna do a good job unless you prepare. Usually, at least.
Yeah, definitely. I'm hearing a lot of like that confidence, wanting to feel confident in what you're going to be doing during session and kind of relieving also some of your own anxieties as you go into it. Dylan, go for it.
Yeah, so I think planning just in general is just a really good way to make sure you're staying organized. Yeah, that's my thoughts.
All right, so staying organized. Brendan?
I think that specifically for SIs, it's really significant that we make sure that we're covering all our bases as far as the content that we're going over, because like one specific topic that we failed to plan for in our reviews might translate to a student like missing, 3 or 4 questions on a test. So I think it has to do with kind of the gravity of what we're teaching.
For sure, like that idea of, we want to be preparing, doing the best that we can for our students, and we don't want to be doing a disservice to them. Emma?
I feel like planning allows you to best utilize your time instead of kind of scrambling. It gives you kind of more like a schedule.
Y'all, this Zoom update where it like hides your bar, I'm over it. I might be going back on all my team's hatred, Sarah, but that's okay. So yeah, those are all some great kind of thoughts, ideas behind like the why when we think about planning. Definitely, like as y'all are talking, one of the words that comes to our mind is stewardship, and like being good stewards of like our students and their time. We want to practice that leadership quality of being good stewards of our students' time. Like this is a voluntary thing. They don't have to be there. And so we need to respect them and respect the fact that they are coming to us and entrusting us to help them. So here's some of the things that we put down for why do we plan. A lot of it has been covered, or some of it has been covered, but that just idea of like being prepared for your sessions, like I think it was Tiffany was saying like that failure to prepare is preparing for failure. Like if we like having that preparation and planning in the back of our head is like that really key to success and holding successful sessions. And then we have creative, detailed, and well thought out planning helps students to retain information more effectively. So this is 100% true. If we just go into session, like if we don't have like a good creative and detailed, well thought out plan, the odds of it like being great for our students, not that great. It's probably not going to be the best for them to like keep and retain that information. But by incorporating those creative activities and like putting that detail and like that intentionality behind your activities, it's really going to help your students so much more than just coming in and being like, all right, let's wing it. Yeah, and so then also it makes your job easier during session. You will be planning, by planning it, you're gonna have like an idea of like what's going on, what's coming next. Obviously you're gonna be factoring in like your students. You don't know exactly what they're gonna be coming into session like every single time, but they will get you. But like having that idea of like this general plan of like, all right, this is where we're starting, this is where we're entering. These are kind of like the checkpoints I know we're going to hit along the way, is definitely going to help kind of calm those anxieties because, like we were saying, like we don't want to steer our students in the wrong direction. And so, yeah, like that kind of leads into this last point of like content drives instruction. We'll talk a little bit more about that on day 3. But one of the first things that we do when planning is come up with a goal. And so by having a plan, we are able to begin with like an end goal in mind. Like, all right, in this specific session, what do I want my students to get out of this? And so by doing that, it allows us to really kind of come up with learning, almost like learning objectives, but like our goal for session, and be very intentional with our activities to make sure that our students are getting what we want them to get out of planning, like in that session. Any comments? Anybody? Admin? Leadership team? All righty. So now we're going to get into some of the just expectations of planning. So generally we say the amount of time you plan should match how long your session is. So most of the time we are in the, oh, Valerie is here. I think. I just admitted. So hopefully, I'm trying to find her, but I can't. Valerie, if you are here, feel free to take over.
Yeah, just give me 1 second.
Incredible. Feel free to jump in whenever, Valerie, but I'll go ahead just for sake of time, continue on with this slide. So yeah, like I was saying, the amount of time you're planning should match the amount of time your session is. So most of our sessions are going to be around 50 minutes. We have some different opportunities to change that timing, but generally we say sessions are 50 minutes. So about an hour you should be spending on planning. And so with that like 50-minute session, you're going to have 2 sessions per week. So you're going to be spending kind of in total around 2 hours of planning each week. I think we said this to most of you in your interviews, but if not, we understand that planning is a skill that takes some time to develop. So especially at the beginning of the semester, if it's taking you longer than an hour to plan for an hour session, that's totally okay. So please like clock that time. We'll get into clocking time and hours logs and all that good stuff, but just know like it's okay that especially in the beginning of the semester that it's going to take a little bit longer to plan sessions. We know that, and that's okay. But we also want to pay you for the time that you are spending planning. So just clock that. But ultimately our goal is to get it down to that around the amount of time that your session is going to be. So if it's like midpoint or further in the semester, if it's still taking you 2 hours to plan for like a 1-hour session, that might be a time where we have a sit down with an admin member or a member of the leadership team and try and figure out, like what is it that is taking you so long to plan, and how can we get that down to closer to that 1 hour for that 1-hour session. Yeah. Valerie, are you ready, or you want me to keep going?
Yeah. Thank you, Oscar. Sorry, I had serious Zoom problems. I'm on my phone, so I apologize if it's a little rocky. Okay, so yeah, everything Oscar said, totally agree with. I wrote it, so yes, of course I agree with it. Okay, so next point, your planning should be adequately filled out and meet the expectations that we will talk through today. So essentially, we're going to show you what a good planning sheet looks like and a few examples of how you should be filling these out, what we expect, and kind of what it should look like. So that will become the expectation once you get trained on that and have a little bit of practice, that you're able to, prove that you're able to fill out a planning sheet and that you're adequately preparing for your sessions. And if that's something that you ever, run into issues with, we can always work with you on that and get you up to where you need to be. So your planning needs to be submitted no later than 24 hours before your session. Honestly, a good rule of thumb is the night before session is like absolute final deadline. So if you have a session that's like, 8 a.m. on Wednesday, or you have a session that same day, 5 p.m. On Wednesday, Tuesday night should be the latest time you're submitting your planning. And honestly, it should be probably a little bit earlier than that, like, Tuesday morning, afternoon. If you're consistently planning at like 1 in the morning, we might talk to you about that and just see like, hey, what's been going on? Are you leaving enough time to actually adequately plan for your sessions, and not just, kind of doing it at the last minute and stuff. But yeah, day before, night before is a good rule of thumb. Obviously, you can do earlier than that. If that works for you. Some people I know, they'll plan like days in advance, like they'll go ahead and plan their sessions for the week on the same day. So that's fine too. Whatever works for you, honestly, is what's best. So you're going to be submitting these on UNG Connect. And you'll have a few trainings on kind of how to navigate that. But essentially, you'll go to the group page and it'll be under your surveys and forms, and it'll be titled something like planning sheet, and it'll say like spring 2023. So you'll be able to quickly identify that, and it's probably the form that you'll end up using the most on there, along with a couple of other options as well. Okay, Oscar, I think you can, yeah. Okay, so by now you should be kind of familiar with this, but before we like move on to the next section, can anyone tell me what the 3 parts of session are? And you can just raise your hand, or actually, I don't know, can I see hands on here? Oscar, you might have to like call on people.
All right, looks like Dylan had his hand up first.
Yeah, the 3 parts are the opening, the main content, and the closing, right?
Does anyone agree with that or disagree? We got some agree in the chat. All right, yeah. So yes, the 3 parts of session are the opening, the main content, and the closing. And that'll be important for moving forward when we talk about the next part of planning. Okay, so since you're going to have a opening, main, and closing part of session, you're going to need to plan for those said parts of session. So you'll end up planning an opening, 2 main contents, and a closing for 15-minute sessions. Openings and closings are about like 10 minutes each, and then your main activities are going to be about 15 minutes each. There is an optional main 3 that sometimes people like to use. It'll be on your planning sheet at all times. These can be utilized for longer sessions, which we probably won't get into under training probably these next few days, but we might talk about it later. But if you end up having longer sessions like test reviews or double sessions or anything like that, a lot of times people use a main 3 for those. Also, sometimes people like to do shorter main activities. So instead of doing like the 2 15-minute activities, they like to do 3 10-minute activities to break things up a little bit more. And also, I've seen the main 3 used as sort of a backup or a just in case type of activity. So sometimes if you're planning something a little more complicated or like complex material, sometimes you want to have like a backup in case you're like, okay, in session, no one came to class and people are just really struggling with this activity and you want to move on to something simpler, or you think an activity might go kind of fast. Some people would like to use that main 3 as a backup plan for that, and they just plan the activity and then sometimes they use it in session, sometimes they don't, or if they don't use it, they'll save it like for their next planning. So that is an option, but I want to stress that the main 3 is optional. So the only thing that you are required to plan for is the opening, the main activity 1 and 2, and then the closing. But the main 3 will always be on there on your planning sheet. You'll just skip that page if you don't feel like doing a main 3 activity that time. A couple other things that I want to stress, which we'll look at and get into. You must be uploading resources when appropriate. So we'll take a look at what a planning sheet looks like, but essentially you'll talk about, what content you're going to be covering, what activity you chose, and what CLT you chose, and sort of explaining how all that's going to work together, like how you're going to get students to work together, how the activity is going to go. But the main part of planning, honestly, is your content, or what, like the substance of what you planned. So this is, let's just use chemistry for an example. Chemistry, a lot of times you're going to be working with actual like problems, like you're going to be doing math, or if you're balancing reactions, stuff like that. If you're using any of that type of stuff in session, you're going to need to write it out and upload it as like an attachment to your planning sheet. Same thing with really any other subject. Some people like to use a PowerPoint in session to keep them on track with everything. If you're using something like that, you'll upload it. If you're having students do like a fill in the blank, you would upload that worksheet. Really, any worksheets you're working on, answer keys, terms that you're using, really this, like I said, the substance of what you're working with in session, all that stuff needs to be uploaded. Times when you wouldn't necessarily use resources, if you're having students do a brain dump where you're like, okay, just go up to the board and write down everything that you can remember from session. Stuff like that, you wouldn't necessarily need an attachment because, the students are bringing the content themselves and they're, writing it down in session. But anything else where you're like, I have students working on this or doing this, you need to prove that and kind of upload that under each section of your planning. And we'll kind of, again, look at what that looks like, but that is something to always keep in mind. See a question in the chat, sorry. No, I wouldn't say that needs to be cited. No, I don't think that's something we've ever done. We really just use it for making sure you're kind of doing what needs to be done. And Emily, I don't think we do that, right? Or any admin member?
No, we don't have to like cite.
Yeah.
It's more of a just like having them on there so that you can pull them up. They're easily accessible. Someone can, like an admin mentor, can go in and look and see what you're supposed to be, like what you're working on, that kind of thing. We also will go into resources tomorrow in our like teams overview and show you kind of some already resources that we will pull from your planning sheet so other people can use some of those resources as well.
Also, to answer Harrison's question, yes, planning can be done on the weekend. Planning can really be done anytime. You're just submitting a form on what's it called, UNG Connect. So at any time that it's really convenient for you, I would say, don't plan too far ahead. If you're planning like weeks in advance, you don't really know what content you're going to be covering in class. So I would say be wary of that. But yeah, if you're wanting to plan a few days, weekend in advance, that's totally fine. Final point, just another thing we'll look at is always planning for multiple scenarios. So, you never really know, honestly, what you're going to get in session. You can kind of try to predict based on trends that you've seen or, what kind of students you've been having in session and stuff. But you always really have that unexpected element, especially when you get to like, right before an exam is coming up or a big project. So you never know, like you might go from having 1 or 2 students to having like 6 students walk in, or the opposite. You might be always having like 6 or 7 students and then all of a sudden 1 student walks in. So stuff like that, you always want to be prepared for that. You never want to just plan like, oh yeah, I know this big group is going to come, so that's all I'm going to plan for. You always want to have something in your planning as like a backup, like, oh, if only 1 student comes, this is how I will adapt my plan to that. So always writing something about that when you're doing your planning is really, really important. I think we can go ahead and go, yeah. So now let's take a look at an actual planning sheet so you can kind of see what we've been talking about. So when you first pull up the form on UNG Connect, this is the first thing that you're going to see every single time. It's just going to ask you your name, what course you're facilitating for, who's the professor that you're paired with, and when your session is. You can kind of read on there the format that we use for that. The main thing I want to point out here is the session goals and objectives. So when you're looking at this, you never just want to say like, oh, we're just covering chapter 8 today. When I go in and read that as like a mentor or an admin does, we don't really know what you mean when you say that, because every class and every textbook is a little bit different. So you want to, for one, be specific on what you're covering, what exact topic it is. If you want to include the chapter numbers and stuff, just for your own personal reference, that's fine. Just making sure you're being specific about what is the goal that you want students to accomplish today. And I think, honestly, this is the part that gets a little lost as we go through the semester. People kind of just, they get into the routine of doing it. But it's really important to know what your goal is for session and then plan strategically based on that. It helps you stay on track with, okay, this is what kind of opening I need to do. This is what kind of closing I need to do. This is what our objective is for the day. So you might even want to write, where students are with the content. Like maybe they just started this content, or how proficient do you want them to be with it by the end of session? So that's just a nice little box for you to explain what exactly you're wanting to accomplish in this session. All right, so the next thing you'll see is the planning for your opening activity. So obviously all this will end up being like blank, or you can fill in your own, but these are just some examples of what that might look like. So I believe this is chemistry. Oh no, the screen went, okay, yeah, never mind. Okay, so we're looking at chemistry. You can see the facilitator has planned for a matching game, and then the content is just whatever you're going to be covering. So, this is chemistry, so they're talking about gas law concepts, and that'll be different for every subject. And then you'll go into selecting your CLT. Your CLT is how you want students to work together in this activity. So you've already chosen what activity you want to do. But now you're choosing, how am I getting students to collaborate together in this activity to achieve the goal that we have? Quick question. Does anyone, right here we have group discussion selected for this activity. Does anyone think we could maybe use a different CLT for this?
I will also throw in, if y'all have ideas, that's great based off some of the CLTs we've used today, but we will go into a deep dive of CLTs tomorrow. So if you aren't really sure what some of these CLTs are, or any of them are, that is okay at this point. We're gonna deep dive into them tomorrow.
You can also throw suggestions in the chat as well if you don't want to raise your hand. I apologize. I thought we'd already gone over CLTs at this point. I don't think there's any hands up, not that I can see. All right. Yeah, let's see. So we've got some think, pair, share, turn to a partner. Yeah, pairs. Yeah, those are all great ideas. And really the main point of this question is not to, test you on if you know what the CLTs are. The point is that really a lot of activities can use different CLTs. There really is no right answer when it comes to this. Like I said, it's how you're wanting the students to work together. So really, you could change it to something completely different. Whether you want students to do this matching game like in a big group, maybe you want to split them off into partners. Maybe you want them to work by themselves for a little while and then get together into partners. So these choices are up to you. Like I said, there's no right answer. So when you're planning for these, you have a lot of discretion here when it comes to what you want to choose and how you want the students to work together for certain activities. I hadn't mentioned this earlier, but opening activities are really not supposed to be heavy material. So this is just you getting the students' feet wet, kind of preparing for the main activity content, which is going to be a little bit more in depth. But it should be along the same lines content-wise. Maybe it's just a little bit easier. You're trying to prep their brains or see what they remember from lecture, that kind of stuff before you get into more difficult material. All right, so on the same page, you should see the next, oh, you can go to the next one, Oscar. You'll see this is still part of the opening activity. So now this is where you'll plan for the actual activity itself. You're going to write down kind of what is your plan for the activity. Do you think you can kind of describe your CLT and how you think that'll work in conjunction with your activity that you chose. And then any specifics about like how you want students to work together. Maybe, after 5 minutes, they'll move to this next part, and just exactly how you would want the activity to run. And you're going to describe this as if you're describing it to someone that could just walk in and not know what you planned and be able to read your planning sheet and then run that activity themselves. So we want a decent amount of detail. And also, like I mentioned before, planning for any additional scenarios. So if you plan some super big activity where students are like rotating in groups and stuff, like you want to plan something for, if I only have one student, I'll adjust it to this. So you'll see some of that in our activities moving forward. But that's something you always want to keep in mind. It should definitely be like at least 3 or more sentences, just to make sure that you have enough detail talking about how you want your activity to look. The next section you're going to look at is checks for understanding. So for every single activity that you plan, you're going to have to talk about how you will check for students' understanding. And again, this is something that's kind of up to you as to how you best think that you can judge students' retention of the knowledge or the activity that you went through. Right here, it says the facilitator is going to ask students how the formulas make sense given the definitions, what it means to have standard temp, standard pressure. So, asking about like definitions of these terms, having them explain it back to the facilitator. And then they write down a few examples of some questions that they might ask. So that's pretty typical for checks for understanding, just a simple explanation of how you're going to have students prove to you that they know the content. You'll then talk about what material you're going to redirect to. So that is just very simple, like, what part of the textbook have they been working in, or where are you drawing this information from? And what are you going to tell students to go back to when they have questions? Will they be looking through their notes or maybe PowerPoints that are uploaded online? So that's something that you'll write down for each activity. Finally, you'll select which learning preference is covered in your activity. We have visual, auditory, reading and writing, and kinesthetic. Again, this is kind of like CLTs where it can be a little bit flexible in terms of what you think it is. There's not really, there kind of is a right answer, but not always. A lot of things are a combination of things, like they'll be reading and writing and auditory, or they'll be visual and kinesthetic. So don't worry about like necessarily getting it correct, but just make sure you're kind of changing it up every once in a while. Like you're not just having students do worksheets and that's it. You're having them do discussions or draw out pictures or diagrams, or incorporating a variety of learning preferences.
With learning preferences too, I'll just add like that is how the students are like working with the material. So like if you are just like putting up something like on the board, like not that you would do this, but if you like put something like professor put something up on the board and like just words on a slide, and then it's just like reading those words off a slide, like the students are working with that material like auditorially, not like reading and writing. So like just because it's words doesn't necessarily mean it's read write. So just kind of like how are the students, like when trying to figure out like which preference it is, like how are the students working with that material is like the answer that should answer that question.
All right, the final part of your for each activity that you'll see, you're going to need to guesstimate a time that you're planning to have for that activity. For the most part, like I said, it's going to fall into the normal 10 minutes for the opening, 15-minute for main activities, and then 10 minutes for closings. Sometimes it's a little shorter or longer than that you plan for. But just, how long you're going to plan for time-wise, or even if you want to split it up, like you could say, oh, I want them to have 10 minutes total, but 5 minutes for discussion and then 5 minutes for working with their partner, or anything like that you want to add in. If you have any links, or like some people like to do Kahoot, so they'll have a link for that, the thing that they made, and you can paste it in there. For this activity, a facilitator didn't have something for that, So that wasn't needed. What you can see here though is that they uploaded a file. So that is the terms and definitions that they're going to be using for the matching. So that's what I was explaining earlier, where it's like, if you are planning this activity, you can tell us in words, this is how the activity is going to run, but you need to give us material in terms of here's what they'll actually be working with. So here's the terms, here's the definitions. That's what they're going to be matching together. And you'll see a few examples of that later too. So you'll have an area to upload resources after every activity. Okay, so this is what you'll see for the next activity. So after your opening, we'll go straight into the main activity number 1. Similar here, we have the content of gas law problems, the facilitator planned for a pass the marker activity, and then their CLT was an assigned discussion leader. All right, and then here's the plan for that activity. Really quickly, reading through the plan, what are some things that you notice about how the facilitator plans for this activity? Or just details that they have added in. You can use the chat or raise your hand. Okay, I think Aiden has a hand up.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that as far as the plan is, it seems like they have a Zoom plan as well. And also I think kind of what you were saying earlier about not having like something super elaborate that you wouldn't be able to scale up or scale down. Like I'm looking at this plan and I don't see why you couldn't just do it with one person if you just had one person show up. So I think that's pretty important to do it like that. That way because you could plan out this whole elaborate thing. And like you said, one person shows up and then you're like, oh, well, I kind of just don't really have a plan anymore. So yeah, it's adaptive. That's a good way to put it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I apologize. This planning is from back when we had a dual modality. So facilitators were having to plan for online students as well. Y'all do not have to do that. You will only be planning for in-person students. So that's one thing you don't have to worry about, thankfully. But yes, the adaptive parts are really good where they're talking about, planning for multiple types of students or, groups. And yeah, I agree with the chat as well that it's got some adaptability, showing the layout and how much time is going to be used for each part of the activity, for sure. And then you can see also they have their checks for understanding here. They have some questions listed out and just generally how they're going to be checking for students' understanding. They have their material that they're redirecting to. They've chosen an auditory learning preference. And like I said, for their plan, they have at least a few sentences explaining out how their activity is going to run. And I feel like, I could go in and somewhat, maybe not with the chemistry knowledge, but somewhat run this activity if I had to. All right, I think we can go to the next slide.
Tiffany, did you have a question?
Yeah, I don't know if it was in there somewhere and I just didn't read it, but I was wondering, so if you went over all the content and then, but you also had worksheets or something that they could take home and do if they wanted, do you do that as an SI facilitator, or is that a no-no to send them with work? If I was thinking of, I would do examples and then have the matching term for an example of that definition below hand, and they could work on it at home and bring it back the next session? Or is that something that we wouldn't do something like that because you'd be on to the next? I think I just answered my own question.
It's okay. Oscar, do you want to answer that?
I was gonna say, I was gonna let maybe Emily or Sarah talk about that one, because I know we talked recently about potentially changing some things when it comes to sharing resources and giving students worksheets, that kind of stuff. But
Yeah.
What's the question? I'm sorry.
Oh.
Trying to
Oh, just
work
like,
on a bunch of things.
I know when I was in class, it helped me when my professor she would give us worksheets with like, it wasn't just the definition, it was examples so that you had a better understanding. And then you'd have the matching word below. And then she'd just go over it really quick with you in class, which you could do you could do that in SI fast too. I just thought, well, what if you just sent them home and you had a little answer key, and then that gives them something to study as well on their own. But I didn't know if you guys don't do that because it's only strictly in the session, you know?
Yeah, so I would say number one, it's very individualized. So that would be something that like we could kind of talk about and talk through. Just in general though, we do number one, I think we really want to focus when planning on like don't do for students what they can do for themselves. So like if they can create a study guide, you don't create the study guide, let them do it. If they can come up with like real life examples, you don't spend the time coming up with real life examples, do an activity where they come up with their own and things. It's always really good for students to have something tangible when they leave session. So like it's kind of mixing those things, like building a study guide that they like in session that they can then leave with is always like a good idea. But we like don't want to do a Kahoot and then send them the link to the Kahoot after session, because like they already did it in session. We don't really want to share that. Like that's something that you created. So we just want to be like very aware of like what materials we are sharing outside of session. If it's something that they're creating, that they're building themselves, those are always good things because it is something tangible that they can then take away. I always think of it as like, I used to make study guides for my history classes, going through those notes and like pulling out things from a study guide. That was really helpful for me as the person who was making it, because like I was actively engaging with the material. But if I send that study guide out to everyone else, yeah, like the student, like my classmates might be like, oh, like this is awesome, thank you. But they're not getting the benefits.
Yeah, I
of
totally
making
I
it.
get what
Yeah.
you're saying. I agree.
So
It'd be
we
better
always
to
wanna
ask them for like, can you give me an example of,
Mhm.
you know, it'll help you remember it if you can give a real life example of whatever the definition. Yeah. Okay.
For sure. Yeah, I think like a standard that I always kind of keep in mind is like, not like, I don't need to do something that they can do for themselves. They will always learn more if they're doing it for themselves. Obviously, that's a little bit different if like your faculty gives you a worksheet to bring to session. Obviously, bring that to session and go through the material with them and stuff like that. But for the most part, don't do for them what they can do for themselves. Eden?
So going off of that, so if they do make something in class, and for example, we had it put like, so we did today in class or in our session, we put stuff on a Venn diagram. Could we send them home with the stuff that they've already put on there, like give them the link to that, or is that like?
I would almost even encourage them just to take pictures or like take a picture or to write it out, you know, like themselves, like copy it down, things like that, so that you don't get into the habit of sending them resources. Because what happens is you will get students who will be like, oh, hey, couldn't come to session. Can you send me that resource? Can you send me that worksheet? The answer is no. Yeah, no, I can't. Like the whole point of the resource, you know, the benefit is by being in session and actively doing those things. So just being able to say, Like, no, I'm actually not allowed to send out resources. We like to say blame up. Feel free to blame me. Say, contact Sarah, she'll tell you why. But no, I'm not allowed to do that. Like, we're, just like setting that precedent, it alleviates a lot of problems that we start to see.
And Emily messaged Sarah and I as well, saying like, so I wanted to give her the credit, which is why I say that. But she pointed out too, like, what makes session work and like what is so great about it is like working through this material collaboratively.
Yeah.
And so if you just send it home with them, it's like doing it by yourself. Like they aren't going to get that full benefit of like coming to session and collaborating with their peers to work on it with someone else.
And then absolutely having resources that they stay inside the classroom. I mean, like they'll have that. They'll like, y'all will be working through Hayes, like your chemistry. You will probably want to bring some worksheets and some problems to work through. That's going to be very helpful for your students. Obviously, you would bring those. And again, those students can take pictures and can copy things down in their notes and stuff like that. But you wouldn't necessarily want to say, okay, here's the worksheet, take it home with you or whatever. Definitely not if you didn't cover it in class in session.
I'm sorry. I just really quick one detail again. Is that okay? I didn't raise my hand. Sorry. Am I?
No, you're good.
Okay. So, but when we hand out those worksheets and they fill them out, they take those home with them and study.
They can take those home.
Okay.
Aiden.
So I had a quick question. So let's say you had like a student that was coming to your session, and then, maybe after the session, the student emails you and is like, hey, what, resources did you use when you took this class? What resources would you recommend? Is that something that's okay?
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. That's one of the great benefits of y'all being students that have taken those these classes before. You will have those things. I would even say but open it up to classmates as well, bring that, that's maybe bring that to session again or whatever that looks like. But yeah, you can absolutely share resources that you've used that helped you. Justin?
A good way to think of it is when we're saying resources, the things you make are what we're saying don't hand out, because that's what you bring to SI. Whereas like a practice website for math or chemistry, something like that you used while you were a student completely outside of SI, that's completely fine to send out.
Yeah.
You just don't want to you want to have the reason for them to come to session. And if you don't get to a worksheet that you had as a backup, you can always use that for a bonus hour or something.
Yeah. And things will come up throughout the semester, and you please ask. Send a Teams message, send an email, whatever. Please ask, because we're talking very broad right now, and there will be little things here and there, and we'll be able to give more specific answers when those things do come up.
All right, so I think that's all for this page. Yeah, and then again, for the same activity, you'll notice the planning for each of these activities looks the same in terms of the format. So you'll be filling in the same boxes, but for different activities. So they've planned 15 minutes for this, don't have any links, and then they have a PowerPoint, as well as some answers for their main one activity. So that's another thing is, if you do have worksheets, making sure that you're uploading answers for those as well, and you're not just saying, here's the problems that we have, because especially with the more quantitative well, actually, I feel like this applies to everything. Answer keys are important for everything, but especially for like, quantitative methods, chemistry, math. If you don't have the answers, you can find yourself in some very sticky situations where you're like, oh, actually, I don't know what the answer is, or oh, I didn't work this out before I got to session, so let me ask the professor, or you just aren't able to give students answers at the end. So that's something you want to watch out for and prepare yourself. So making sure you always have answers to everything, whether it's multiple choice, whether it's math problems, whether it's a Kahoot, always having the answers for those is super, super important, and then uploading those as well. All right, I think we can move on there.
With that, I'll also just say, if you find like a worksheet with the answer key, you still need to go ahead. Part of your planning should be going ahead and working through that worksheet and making sure you get the same answers as the answer key. Because trust me, I've been there where like I was getting observed by a mentor and I just assumed the like answer key answer was going to be right. And I thought my students did everything correct and it didn't match that answer key. And it was a big old confusion while I was getting observed. So not a great time. Work through those problems that you have planned for session.
Yeah, and I know this is really nitpicky, but like also even just the steps, especially for math, because sometimes you'll have the answer and you're like, I have no idea how they got there. So yeah, sometimes writing out the steps for the math problems is also really beneficial too, especially if you're in something like pre-calc or calculus, or just like you get into really complex problems. Not just having the final answer, but also the steps to get there is pretty important as well. So really quickly here, I just wanted to highlight, again, you're going to plan for a second main activity. It's going to look exactly the same. This is just a kind of a clip of the very first page. So you'll be able to scroll through and plan exactly the same for your second main activity. Like I mentioned earlier, your main 3 is also always going to be on there, and it's an optional thing. So, if you aren't planning on using that, you can just kind of scroll past that and go down to your closing. But just so you can kind of see how those look, we have some images there. Okay, I think we can go on to the next. All right,
Valerie,
so
quick, I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
Did you see Hayes's question in the chat?
Oh, 1 second.
I can read it. It's a good one. So if someone or a group of students has a question that disrupts your normal plan, is that okay? Or does the facilitator need to come back around to their plan?
Honestly, one of the things with session is that you can be adaptable and kind of change things as you go. We do want to try to stick to our plan as much as possible. There is a reason why we plan. As we've kind of gone through, there's kind of strategic reasons behind everything, and what amount, like what kind of content you're going through and stuff. Sometimes students will have a question that kind of goes off track and it starts going into like different content or something else. At that point, you can kind of make a decision. Sometimes if you have specific content prepared maybe that goes over that question, you can skip some of the questions maybe that you had for the beginning of their activity and maybe go to those. If you're not wanting to do that, you can redirect to your bonus hour. Or even honestly to the professor. So sometimes I've had, facilitators in session, they'll be like, a student has a question and it just starts getting super complicated. Or they bring like a question from their homework and they're like, hey, I don't know how to do this. And it's one of those things, it's like a 10-minute problem that takes forever to work out. I've had facilitators be like, yeah, you know what? Right now we need to do this other activity for everyone else, but if you bring this to bonus hour, we can sit down and work through it and talk about it. So there's a few options there. You never want to get like too off track from your plan. So don't like spend like you're halfway through your session and then all of a sudden you just start answering a student's question and that's the rest of your session. So never let something like that happen. But if you see an opportunity maybe to answer a student's question while also kind of still sticking to your plan, that's an option as well. And then the main one is redirecting to your bonus hour as well. Anything else? Yeah, Oscar, go
I was
ahead.
gonna say, I like to always like something, if you haven't caught on it already, we like to always kind of explain our why, and maybe including that as well, like explaining like, I'm not going to necessarily, like, if you're asking about X, but we're only focusing on Y and Z in session, like in sessions, we're keeping up with the class material. We aren't able to cover every single item that gets covered in class, because we only have like 3 hours of study time with our students each week. Like, we aren't going to be able to cover every single thing and be able to follow the SI model. So there are just going to be some things that we might not be able to cover, but what we're doing in session will hopefully be able, like, you'll be able to then go forth and kind of focus in, use some of the same strategies to focus in on X outside of session. But also, a lot of content builds on top of each other. So if you can find ways, like later on, like a lot of times if I had students like asking about a certain topic, like that was clearly something I was really like, all right, cool, they aren't 100% on that. So like maybe later on when we're doing an activity, I might ask like a checks for understanding question and kind of relating it back to that topic that that student had a question about, and see if another student can kind of explain that and then bring it back to the student who had that initial question. So keep going with your plan. You've chosen your plan for a very specific reason. We're being very intentional with our plans. So yeah, just wanted to add that there.
All right, so getting into the closing, does anyone want to take a guess at why we do a closing activity? I know the answer is kind of up there, but you know. I think Madeline was first.
I definitely think that the closing activity helps for checking for understanding, because if people aren't engaged, that final question, you can tell by asking it or doing a problem.
Absolutely. Okay, Ashley, did you want to answer as well?
Sure. I was thinking it's a good way to like summarize the session, over 50 minutes, like a lot can happen and they might forget what happened at the beginning or something. It's a good way for them to remember and leave like confident for the material.
Yeah, so we have a recap of what we did in session. We have some checks for understanding at the end. Aiden, did you also have something to input with that?
I was just gonna say something you could do that I was thinking about is maybe you have like a Kahoot that's like 10 questions, and then after you answer the question, obviously it shows the feedback. So you can say like, okay, if you got it wrong, remember in the session when we were talking about this, and then just kind of draw back on it.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of activities that you can do for a closing type of activity. Also from the chat, we have some checks for understanding, solidify knowledge from session. Yes, absolutely. Also, to answer Harrison's question, yes, bonus hour. Yeah, Oscar's kind of already got it, but yeah, it is not like a session. You don't really plan for it in the traditional sense of planning. It's a lot more free form where you can take students' questions, work on stuff, and you're not going to be planning like you would for a normal session. All right, so yeah, those are all really great answers. A closing activity is absolutely that. You're checking for understanding, wrapping up what content you did throughout the session. A closing should never be introducing new material. You should always only be kind of wrapping up what you did in session and checking for understanding mainly. Your heaviest checks for understanding should definitely come in your closing. So here we have an example of a closing activity. You can see the content is reviewing the understanding of the gas laws, which was covered in this session. The activity is two truths and a lie, and the facilitator has selected think, pair, share for the CLT. Now looking at the plan, it looks pretty solid. We've got the facilitators kind of explained. Two truths and a lie, most people kind of understand, so I don't think they went quite as in depth with this one. But they kind of, outlined what they wanted to do in this activity through 10 minutes. And then they also wrote out some checks for understanding. In these checks for understanding, the way that the facilitator has planned this is after the the partners have exchanged their lie statements and identified, oh, okay, this one I think is the lie. For each of the pairs, they said that they'll have the partners correct each other's lies into truths so that they can prove that they know that information. Other than that, for this type of activity, what other ways could we maybe check for understanding? Go ahead, Anna.
Well, you can also ask them to apply what they've learned, such as give an example and ask them if they can solve it or answer it.
Yeah, absolutely. So definitely getting them to answer a question or explain something is a great way to check for understanding. Any other ideas?
I was gonna say you could ask them to give a scenario where one of the lies is true. Like if you wanted to change it into something else, you could say, "Hey, so what's a way that we could make this true?" So that way you maybe understand why it is or it isn't for that certain situation. Because I'm not big into chemistry, I just don't. That was just an idea.
You're fine. Yeah, that's absolutely a great way to do it. I've even seen some facilitators go so far as to write out an incorrect answer once they know that students are pretty decently confident with the information. Sometimes they'll solve a problem and they'll just put like a mistake or a wrong answer and see if students catch it. It's something you don't want to do that too often because then students will be like, well, they have no idea what they're talking about. But if every once in a while adding that in and being like, seeing if they can identify the mistake or purposely putting mistakes in somewhere in your planning to get an extra check for understanding. And it can be especially effective in the closing. I love all the things that were mentioned about checks for understanding. Another good way is just getting them to teach something back if it's more of a like conceptual thing. Getting them to explain certain terms. You could write out questions that you want to ask them at the end to check for their understanding. So there's really great options. And you'll have resources as well available to you as when you're planning and when you get to that point where you are planning on your own, where there's examples, lists of checks for understanding and how to use checks for understanding. So you'll have some resources to help you out there if you ever get stuck with that. And again, similar to everything else that we've covered, the facilitator has put the material they're redirecting to, the learning preference, the time. For this one, they didn't upload any resources because the students are coming up with the material, they're coming up with the truths and the lies. So the facilitator doesn't need to attach anything for that. Oh, Oscar, yeah. You'll also have a final page at the end to upload any additional resources that you use. Each activity has its own space for you to upload resources at the end of each page. So if you want to attach something specifically for your opening or exactly for your closing. But this is a final page where if you want to attach anything extra or you have like a PowerPoint for the entire session, you have space to do that here.
All right, Valerie, I'm gonna hijack your presentation, if that's okay.
Yeah, go ahead. Mm-hmm.
So since we're running behind on time, what I would love for us to do is to just take the like 2-ish minutes and kind of sit with everything that Valerie has just explained to us about planning, look back over your notes, kind of make sure we're feeling solid about that, everything that was covered in this. And let me go ahead, I can stop sharing. Think about everything that was covered in this kind of training portion about planning. And then after those 2 minutes, think of any questions that you still have or any lingering questions about planning and just send them in the chat. That way, admin mentors will make sure that we get down all those questions and so that we have some different times to kind of focus on planning later on training as well. So we just want to make sure that we can get those questions answered. So yeah, take like 2 minutes, look back over your notes, sit and think on that material and come up with any questions that you still have, and then send them in the chat. Alrighty, so if you are still typing those questions, that's perfectly okay. But we are going to take a little bit of a break before we head into this last portion of training. So we are going to go a little bit off the schedule, but that's okay. We're being adaptive. So let's go ahead and say, let's take a 7-ish, well, it's about to be 6-minute break. Try and be back at 2:20 for our next section of training, and then we'll finish out the day strong. So be back around 2:20, please. All righty, welcome back, everybody. Hopefully, we all had a nice little break. I know we got just a little bit longer in the day, but y'all are doing great, and we appreciate you, everybody staying focused and all of your engagement with everything that we are doing today. And so, yeah, we just ask that you continue that as we enter into our last kind of two. We got one more like section of training, and then we got a closing. So yeah, we just ask that y'all continue up that great work that we are seeing. And then I think Larab, are you here? She was.
Yes, I'm here.
All right, perfect. Larab, do you want me to share the video or do you want to share the video?
Well, I thought Sarah was going to share, but I can. Do
I
you
can
have it?
share it. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Also, while I'm pulling that up, so yeah, some questions have already been answered in the chat, but if your question hasn't been answered, that is perfectly okay. We have multiple sections throughout the rest of training where we're going to get into some planning stuff. So just know, don't fret, your questions will be answered. We took all the questions down that were listed in the chat, so your questions will get answered. Do not stress about that. And then, sorry, just pulling this up. Larab, if you want to introduce what we're about to do, I'm almost ready.
Okay, yeah. So basically we pre-recorded a session and I kind of facilitated that session. And some of the other mentors, Elise, Brett, and Jenny, were basically the students in that session. And we kind of just want to walk you guys through what a normal session should look like and how you guys can apply the 3 elements in your sessions.
Sweet. So I am gonna go ahead and share my screen and make sure I share it with sound. All right, before I start it, can y'all see it? Seeing some head nods. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and hit play once I mute myself, if Zoom will let me.
All right. Hi, guys. How are you guys?
I'm good. How is everyone?
Good.
I'm
Jenny, how
excited
are
for
you?
our session.
All right. We can get started now since it is 12. So, Jenny, is your camera and audio working or your mic? If you could say something in the chat. Okay, that's fine. So you can use the chat and you can use your reactions. Can you send a reaction? So just to stay engaged throughout the whole meeting. Okay, perfect. So we can get started with the opening. Did you guys watch the Foundations of SI video?
Yes, I did.
Okay, perfect. So we're gonna start off by doing a brain dump, and I want you guys to, here, let me open a whiteboard. You guys all know how to use a whiteboard?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so I just want you guys to think SI session and write whatever you can think of from the Foundations of SI video onto the board. And I'll set a timer for 3 minutes, but if you guys need a little bit longer time, then that's fine as well. You guys can keep writing if you need to. All right. Do you guys think you've gotten everything that you could think of?
Yes, I try to put as much as I wrote in my notes down.
Okay. So who wants to start by talking about something they wrote up here?
Can I go?
Yes.
Um, one of the biggest things I got out of watching the video is that what makes SI unique, for example, we're very collaborative, so like working together to learn stuff, and how in the video our director Emily Cook mentioned that SI uses like proven theories from like psychology and so on, like theories like cognitive development theory that kind of help promote learning when you're in the SI environment. So I thought that was very interesting.
Okay, yeah, I definitely agree. I think the theories was one of my favorite parts of the video because it was so interesting to see how each of those went into SI, and I do think they're all correct. What about you, Brett? Is there something you want to talk about?
Yeah, so something I wrote up there was SI is not like tutoring, it's proactive, not reactive. Because tutoring is you go when you need help, but SI it's different because from my understanding is you go because you don't need the help, but you want to make sure that you're understanding content as it comes up. So it's not remedial like what tutoring is.
I agree with Brett, which kind of reminds me of how one of the points I put was having scheduled review sessions that you don't have to reach out to like you would like a tutor. That can be like different times every week, but with SI, the facilitator has set times each week. You can just go on a consistent basis, which I remember in the video, consistency was a big part of what makes SI stand out as well.
Yeah, and what do you guys think is a really important thing about being a student who facilitates a group versus being a tutor who has like a lot more professional experience?
I think that sorry, there's a trash can out, like a trash truck outside. There's a bunch of noise in the background,
Okay.
which happens in regular sessions too. But what I was trying to say is, I think one of the biggest differences is that as an SI facilitator, you're not the expert per se. You're kind of supposed to be on the same level as your students, which is kind of the peer-led aspect. You're still a student yourself. You're still learning a lot. You haven't graduated with your degree or anything yet, so you're still learning, and you aren't exactly an expert as maybe hiring like a professional tutor instead, or even going to the tutoring center at the library.
What do you think about that, Jenny? And do you guys feel that students are able to be more comfortable with you because they know like you're kind of at the same level as them versus like if they went to a tutor?
Yeah, I think so. Because I mean, SIs are students that have taken the class before and then are sitting through it again to help the students that are in it now. So I mean, they'd see you not as like, as intimidating as like a tutor or a professor. They'd see you more as like, oh, they were where I was not that long ago.
I agree with Brett and Jenny.
Yeah, I agree with everything you guys said. Jenny, is there something you want to talk about that you wrote up here? Yeah, I agree. I think that's a really interesting point. And I did also find it interesting that SI was started in or like SI was in Gainesville before it was in Dahlonega. That was part of the video, right?
Yes, I remember thinking the same thing. I think it was Gainesville and Oconee, if I
Yeah.
remember right. Even before Dahlonega, which is usually people think of Dahlonega when you think UNG, but like we say, all the campuses are just as important because we're one big family in SI.
Yeah, I agree. And who wrote the 1 hour of SI equals 2 hours of independent study?
That was me.
All right, do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So, it's a proven like statistic that I remember hearing that 1 hour of SI is equal to 2 hours of independent study because when you're in session, it keeps you focused and you aren't checking your phone every 30 minutes or you aren't, reading through your notes going, man, this is boring. And then, starting going through Instagram or something like that. So it helps keep you focused and on track.
How do you guys think this knowledge would be beneficial for an SI facilitator? Because this seems like something that's beneficial for these students, but how do you think this could help a facilitator?
I think two ways. Like one, maybe that the facilitator kind of that information would help them like be encouraged to go to other facilitators SI centers if they happen to have a class with another fellow facilitator where they can support them, but also get that same benefits their students would. But also, I think it would help share this information with their students, like letting them know the statistic Brett was just talking about, that 1 hour of SI equals about 2 hours of personal study time, that they could use that to get more attendance for their sessions by maybe like saying that like in their first day speech about explaining what SI is and the benefits. And I think that would be a good way to just let students know what they could get out of SI and maybe help build some attendance of getting more students attending their sessions.
Yeah, I agree with what you said, Elise. And really, it's just like learning the value of time and knowing how your facilitation is affecting your students. But yeah, both would be right. All right, so are you guys ready to move on?
Yes.
Okay, so I just want to talk a little bit about the 3 elements in the opening. I'll start off by talking about wait time just because there was a mistake I made in terms of wait time that I made a few other times in the session, and this wasn't on purpose. I just noticed I did. So before I start, did anyone catch the mistake? I'm just curious. Okay, yeah. So basically I think specifically, oh, someone said before I redirected.
Sorry, I was trying to type and it didn't work. I just meant one of the times, I don't know if this is what you're talking about, but one of the times before you redirected to another person, I don't know if there was enough wait time, to like let people maybe come in and like speak. Um, but I don't know if that's what you're talking about.
That is actually a really good point because you do have to make sure wait time is long enough for them to think about what they just said. But that wasn't the one I was thinking of, but that was a good catch. It was when Brett was talking. So it was whenever he was answering or presenting his topic, whatever he was talking about, I was basically nodding my head. And I think that, or not, I know that just contradicts the purpose of wait time, because you do want to give them those 5 to 7 seconds to process what they just said, just to make sure that they are confident about their answers and not relying on your validation. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay. So yeah, but the positive of wait time was when Elise jumped in and added something on to what Brett was saying. And I thought that was a perfect representation of why we apply wait time. So basically, whenever I was giving Brett or applying wait time after Brett answered, Elise was able to jump in, and notice how she jumped in last minute, which is the importance of giving enough wait time, like Eden said. You want to make sure you're giving them those 5 to 7 seconds to process what they're saying in their heads before they jump in, but also to just test their own confidence and make sure that they're not relying on you, like I said. And also it does give them time to redirect themselves. And this occurs more later on in session, and in general, it occurs more in main activities, according to just what I've experienced. But yeah, that's the importance of wait time in the opening. Does anyone have anything to add on to that?
Any thoughts about any of Larab's use of 3 elements, or just general facilitation skills, or anything that she did that you're like, that was great, or maybe I would have done this differently? Aiden.
I thought one thing she did that I would want to incorporate in my own sessions was using follow-up questions. So like someone would answer, and then she would kind of help them dig deeper by asking a follow-up question, just to kind of, because sometimes you think you know something and then somebody asks a follow-up question, you're like, oh, I don't really know that. So I thought that was really good. I think that should be used. I guess you'd classify that as a check on learning.
Also, Laura, feel free to take back over. I just wanted to add in a little more options.
Oh, okay. You guys can keep your hand raised. I'll get unless you guys want to talk about wait time, because I do have something I do want to say about checks for understanding, but if you guys have anything to say about wait time, you can go ahead and say that right now. Tiffany, would you like to say something? It's okay if it's
Mine
not about
wasn't
wait time.
totally
Go
about
ahead.
wait time. I just noticed what he noticed. And then I was thinking the whole time you were doing that, I was like, I hope I can ask the right questions. Like you said something where instead of telling them, you phrased it as a question, but it was kind of like leading them to find the answer. I forget what it was. And I was like, I wrote down, I need to learn how to ask good questions when I'm facilitating, because that was clearly something that you repeatedly did. So, and then the wait time thing, I didn't know that until I did the training. And I thought that was really good to make sure it builds your own confidence that you're not looking to somebody else to validate you, or it probably helps you not be afraid to make mistakes too. Like, oh, well, I got it wrong. I guess I learned. But anyways, that's what I was going to say. And I just didn't take my hand down. So sorry about that.
Hey, I had a slight question regarding wait time. Obviously there's like the couple of seconds after the question wherein you just want to make sure that you're not giving like, body language cues that it might be right so that they're confident in the answer. But I had an essay in the past that like when the answer was given, even if it was the right answer, would like directly ask like, oh, are you sure about that, without any indication that it was correct or not. Can you speak to that being a good strategy, or maybe thoughts on something like that?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like I do that a lot, where you kind of want to test them. So have them doubt themselves, and that can be, yeah, mild gaslighting. That would be correct. You just want to have them kind of doubt themselves, because that is how they will build their confidence. So whoever was applying that strategy they were doing great. James, would you like to add on to that?
Yeah, it's kind of in the same vein. So we're supposed to give, the 5 to 7 second wait before they answer the question. But in the pursuit of kind of carrying along a dialogue and keeping a casual setting, if it's like a back and forth, like you answer the initial question, it's like, oh, okay. Do you have to do that same thing for every single little like interaction? Or is it just like the big, I ask a question, they give a response? If that made any sense.
So are you saying, sorry, I might have not understood that. Are you saying after you apply wait time, can you just move on without like going back and saying or following up with it?
Well, like, let's say I ask a question and then they give an answer. And so I'd wait before I'd say, whether that answer was, let's say it was incorrect. And then I'd say, okay, that wasn't quite right. If they then ask, oh, can you explain that? Do I have to wait for that or anything? Or can we just talk about that real quick?
Oh yeah, I think that would be completely up to you and the situation, but I would say go ahead and apply that wait time, just because why not? And it might have, actually, I would say go ahead and apply the wait time, because it'll really give them that time to answer their second question, especially because if you guys have just had a discussion about the first section, you really want to also apply checks for understanding there and check their knowledge of what you guys just talked about and see how they can apply that later on.
I'll also say it'll add that time for another student to maybe step in and explain their reasoning. And that way you can get an idea of like if some of the other students are also understanding, or if like nobody has any idea and they're all just looking at you blank, it's like, okay, clearly nobody really knows what's going on. We might need to kind of dive a little deeper into that. In the chat, we had a question from Susanna. Was the time given for the brain dump wait time? If so, how much time should we give for that?
So that was just the time I gave them to get their thoughts out. I guess you could call it wait time because I'm trying there to not interrupt them while they're writing on the board, because I could have easily like facilitated as they're writing on the board and like talked about what they're writing as they're writing it. And oftentimes I do that. Like maybe if we're working on a main activity while they're working, I go around and I use the 3 elements on them as they're working. But there, I just wanted them to think back to the video and their notes and just get their thoughts down. All right, so there was one thing I wanted to point out. This was the use of checks for understanding when we were talking about the 1 hour of SI equals to 2.5 hours of your own study time. And I said, how can this be beneficial for the facilitator? So basically, I feel like in that scenario, the students would be expecting me to say something like, how can this benefit the students, or something that seems kind of straightforward, and they're like kind of expecting a checks for understanding. But I mean, obviously that's okay, like you can do that. Asking them, how will this be beneficial for the student, is also effective. But the use of that and follow-up questions like who was it? I'm sorry, I don't know. I don't know who it was who pointed out earlier. But you talked about how follow-up questions allowed you to go, yeah, it was Aiden who said follow-up questions allow you to go deeper into the questions. And basically when I'm talking about, or when I'm rerouting a question, so instead of saying, how does this benefit the students? I'm saying, how does this benefit the facilitator? I'm allowing them to think about the context from a different direction. So this can either allow them to dig deeper into whatever we're discussing, or kind of make connections between their notes. So I can bring in something that they're, sorry, I can bring in something that they're not discussing that I think would be important to discuss in that, in the topic that we're discussing. Does that make sense? So whatever, like if I want to shift the discussion to something else that kind of branches off of that, I can use the checks for understanding to kind of go about that. And Tiffany, I do know that once you start facilitating in that way, it's really easy to apply checks for understanding. So I think you won't have to worry about that now. Just as you're facilitating, it'll just come to you. And if you do ever just need extra help, you can always ask me. I would love to help you out.
Thank you. I think it will kind of come, because when you're talking about stuff, then you kind of know what to ask if you know the content, but
Yeah, and there's so many checks for understandings that go with anything you talk about. Like when you redirect to other students, you can ask the other students to summarize what student A said, or like tell them to put it into their own words, or ask them a follow-up question, or a question that kind of reroutes the discussion.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what you were just saying, right? You could use a check for understanding to reroute it to, or not to reroute it, to go into the next topic. Yeah.
All right, I think we're ready to move on to the main.
Yep. And Jenny, you can just use reactions anytime I ask something like that. Okay, perfect. So for the main, I'm going to give you guys a few minutes to think to yourself, or kind of just write down a paragraph of what you think the difference between SI tutoring and being in class or with the professor, the difference between all 3 of them, what you guys think the main points would be. And just kind of write it in a paragraph, and then you guys can share it at the end. Does that make sense to everyone?
Makes sense.
Okay, so I'll give you guys a few minutes to think to yourself and write down your paragraphs. And if you need anything, just let me know.
Larob, I have a question.
Yes.
I was curious. I'm still having trouble kind of knowing some of the big differences between maybe like the classroom and tutoring. Can you help me with that?
Okay, so do you have your notes with you?
Yes, I have my notes right here.
So what did you write for tutoring, if you did write something under that?
I kind of with tutoring, the biggest thing that stood out for me that it was kind of targets individuals more than maybe other areas, like especially with SI. I know what I wrote in our opening, SI targets difficult courses, while tutoring might target more individual problems and questions. But I think I'm understanding the answer a little bit more. I would say maybe classroom, you can get that kind of similar to tutoring. You could go to office hours with your professor and kind of get an individual question answered, but also when you're in a classroom, there's also the professor is also focused on leading the group and lecturing to the group, which I know in SI there isn't anyone lecturing like in tutoring or a classroom setting.
Yeah, so you're on the right track. How do you personally feel when you're sitting in a classroom with your professors? How do you feel like if you have a question, or like if you're confused on something and you need a professor to repeat something? How do you normally feel in those moments?
Sometimes I'm scared to ask a question because I'm scared the professor will judge me for my question.
Yeah, and I'm totally the same way. So what do you think the difference between that and an SI session is?
I know from what we talked about in the opening, SI is more like peer led, so you're not supposed to see your facilitator as the expert like a professor. So I'm guessing SI kind of helps be that safe space where you can ask questions without feeling judged. And I know in our first time meeting, you said that it was anonymous, so the professor doesn't know that I'm going to SI sessions, so I don't have to worry about what the professor thinks.
Yes, and any one of you can answer this, but I'm not sure if any of you remember, but what are SI facilitators supposed to be between the students and the professors? There was a word that I remember. I'm not sure if this was actually part of the video. It just came to me now.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I was thinking it was a bridge.
Elise, what do you think?
I don't know if it's the exact word used in the video, but I would agree that facilitators are kind of a bridge between the professor and the student, since the facilitator is able to work with the professor to know what course material might be extra difficult in the class to go over in sessions, but then they can also tell the professor things that students have come to them that they want extra time in class, maybe of material covered. So I think bridge is a good word, even though I'm not sure if it was exactly the word in the video or not.
Yeah, and this goes back to what we talked about in the opening and what you just brought up, Elise. Our students are more comfortable with us, talking to us because they know we're at the same level as them. So yeah, bridge was the word I was looking for. But yeah, I don't think it was in the video, but do you think that kind of helps you understand?
Yes, I'm feeling a lot more confident now. Thank
Okay,
you.
great. Of course. Okay, do you guys need more time, or are any one of you ready to present what you came up with?
I can go ahead and present what I have if y'all want.
Okay.
So for tutoring, I said tutoring is more reactive. It typically is more one-on-one than a classroom, and it's over more specific topics. And then I said SI is more proactive, helps you study before you're struggling with the content, and it's peer led. And then I said class is just the professor lecturing, and students might not be willing to answer or ask questions because they're afraid of getting judged by the class or the professor.
What do you both think about Brett's answer?
I agree with Brett's answer.
Yes, I would definitely agree. Jenny, would you like to go next? Or as Jenny's, if you're typing yours in the chat, then Elise can talk about her answer if you want.
Yes, I can go ahead. A lot of what I wrote was similar to what Brett said, but that's why I definitely agree with him. But what I did write is for SI, it's very collaborative. You're in a group setting, possibly doing group work. It's peer led. The facilitator is not the expert. They're just a student just like you, and they sit through the facilitator also sits through the class with you over again, going over course material, while with tutoring, it's not focused on a specific course per se, but more tutoring is more focused on specific problems and questions an individual might have. So it's like a one-on-one setting most of the time in tutoring, and it's not and the tutor doesn't sit through the class with you like a facilitator would throughout the semester. Those are two big differences I wrote down. And then with the classroom, very similar to what Brett said, it's kind of a lot of lecturing from the professor, and it might be a setting where you might not feel as comfortable asking questions because of that pressure from the professor. So that's where either like SI might come up where you can ask questions in the group setting without feeling like you're going to be judged for it.
Would you guys agree with what Elise said?
Yeah, I agree.
Would one of you like to read Jenny's answer?
I can read it. So Jenny's answer was tutoring. You can make an appointment, walk in whenever you want. SI sessions have set times. In the classroom, you may feel like not wanting to ask any questions because you are afraid of making a mistake. Professors do have office hours, but sometimes their times may not work for you. If your professor is nice, you can schedule a meeting outside office hours, however.
Yeah, Jenny, I like how you included the positives of having a professor, because you can still get help from tutoring a professor, right? So what do you guys think about Jenny's answer?
I agree with it.
Yes, I agree. And I think should put in a great tip that you can usually schedule maybe an office hour meeting outside of what they have on their syllabus. I think I've worded that wrong. You can schedule a meeting outside of professors like scheduled office hours if you need to, usually if you reach out appropriately.
Yeah, and all three of your answers were kind of similar. So I see that you guys have, the basics or a good understanding. Okay, we can move on to the closing. I did
All right, so for the main, there's not much I want to discuss aside from what we've already talked about during the opening, but I did want to talk about when Elise asked me a question while I was giving them the time to do the activity. She basically asked me to help her with differentiating between tutoring and professor/classroom. And basically, I first redirected her to her notes to help her kind of find the answer herself, or to kind of lead her to the direction of the answer. And as I was applying wait time after she looked at her notes, she said she kind of understands. So she was, if it was in a real setting, the student might have just been ready to end it there and told you they kind of understand, because they feel awkward or they don't want to embarrass themselves. But then I applied checks for understanding when I asked her to put herself into the scenario. I asked her to imagine herself in a classroom and what she would do if a professor asked her a question, or if she had a question and she needed the professor to repeat something. So there was checks for understanding to really make sure she actually understood. And then that also helps her learn a studying strategy that she can later apply when she's at home and studying on her own time. With different topics, she can actually like put herself into the scenario and see how that makes a difference. So yeah, that's basically all I wanted to talk about, aside from the constant redirection to the other students, which I think is very important, just to make sure the other students can add on to what the first student said, or just to make sure they're actually understanding. And I did want to point out the one thing I did with that was I said, how do you guys feel about that, rather than do you guys understand that? Because the difference between those two questions is how do you understand is, or how do you guys feel about that is them actually having to say something, whereas do you feel good about this is like a yes or no question, and they can easily say yes, and you would never know if they actually understood. So there you could also say, can you summarize what Elise said, or can you put this into your own words, or can you add something onto that, something that is more personal to you, I guess. So yeah, that's all I wanted to talk about with the main. Does anyone want to add? Elise, I don't know if you're on to that.
I guess one thing you kind of touched on it, but one thing that you did really well in that main was something just to do overall in session in general, is you were very careful to like, you would call out us by name to be like, hey, Brett, can you add on to this? Or especially with Jenny, we purposely had it where Jenny's camera was off because kind of like the show maybe like a more shy or not interactive student. In the case of like our video, it was she didn't have our camera and wasn't working and our mic wasn't working, but the film didn't cover, I don't think the recording caught it, but like Jenny was talking in the comments and using the reactions on Zoom, so that's probably where the beeping noise was coming from, I think, in the video. But even in a case like that, instead of just kind of letting that student do their own thing away from everyone, Larab was still really good at like saying, hey, Jenny, like by her name specifically, like kind of checking how she was feeling and her understanding as well, and encouraging that participation.
Yeah, I think that is also very useful for sessions. And for the sake of time, I'm just going to quickly discuss the closing. We basically planned for 2 truths and a lie. And if I'm not wrong, I did see that you guys were kind of planning that for the last segment. I think I saw that, but basically we just had an activity where they came up with 3 statements, and it was supposed to be a partnered activity, but because one student was not as engaged and there wouldn't be equal partners, we kind of just did a assigned discussion leader where one person just presented and then the other students would try to guess the lie. But the only thing I did want to point out with the closing was that I remember we were kind of running out of time because we were having issues with Zoom and we only had 40 minutes to record. But I was going to point out that we still applied checks or the 3 elements throughout the whole discussion segment, because the 3 elements really is what makes up a session and probably the most important thing in session, and it can largely hinder the importance or the effectiveness of the discussions. So yeah, I do want to say, even if you're running out of time, make sure you apply the 3 elements, especially wait time. Yeah, that's all I had to say about the closing, unless Elise has anything to add on to that.
No, I think that was a great point, and kind of like how you said, we even in a situation where we were rushed with the closing, you always have time to add in the element, so don't forget about them.
Awesome. So before we get into our closing for day 1, I would love to hear some people's kind of takeaways of like the 3 elements and like getting to watch Slow Rab really put those into practice. Ashley, go for it.
Okay. The redirection you were just talking about, where you had her go to her notes to look up the problem. I thought that one was really good. I didn't actually notice at first though, that she might have not been completely sure about it. When she said that, oh, I have it now, I was like, I completely believed her. So I think I need to take that into account, that they might not be telling the truth, and to like double check. Because I was just like, oh, she's got it. Apparently not. So.
Definitely. I've been that student before. It's like, yeah, I got it. Hoping they would just move on. So we definitely try and break that. Have them prove to us they know it. Scythe, go for it.
I think utilizing that the wait time strategy, waiting that 5 to 7 seconds before answering or elaborating on what your peer just said pertaining to the question. I think that's a really effective strategy in group settings, because it's really interesting because it still kind of pushes the conversation in a linear format. It's not really like an awkward type thing in reality, because it allows for the person that just answered to still kind of think back on what they said and even elaborate more on what they just said, and it just kind of sparks for more conversation within the group. And when I think about the subject that I'm focusing in, which is English, that's kind of a subject that everything you say can really be something that correct in some manner, unless you're just completely off. But for the most part, if you say something that's in contingency or pretty close to the topic itself, it's usually in some manner correct. And utilizing that wait time and allowing your peer to kind of understand what they just said and kind of marinate, everything that they just kind of came up with, it allows for more utilization and growth in general.
We've definitely been talking a lot about wait time. Can someone remind me? I know Madeline and James, y'all already have your hands up, so I'm not expecting y'all to answer this question. But can someone remind me the difference between wait time 1 and wait time 2? Eden, I think you may have your hand up for that one.
From my understanding from the video, wait time 1 was to like build confidence in their answer, and then wait time 2 was to like let other group members participate in their answer, or like the first person's answer, I think.
Any other thoughts on wait time 1 and 2? Tiffany, you have your hand up.
Yeah, what she was saying, just one gives them the opportunity when you ask a question to wait and give them time to process what was just said and like work through that like awkward silence and kind of not pressure them to answer, but kind of maybe if someone doesn't feel like answering and is quiet, then they might answer after they process it. And then after the answer, having them build that confidence and not look to you to see like, am I right? Like giving them a chance to like, I don't know what that word would be, like own their answer and build their confidence. But that would be the differences, I think. So basically what she said.
Yeah. Can someone define for me, like wait time 1 is this, wait time 2 is this? And you can just unmute, go for it.
So I think wait time 1 is after a question and wait time 2 is after an answer. That was like the most simple definition that I got from the video. So you like wait 4 to 7 seconds after somebody asks a question and then 4 to 7 seconds after an answer's been given.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I heard a yeah. I think I saw someone, I
me.
can't remember who, nodding. Any other thoughts? Maybe like a thumbs up or a reaction to that? How we feel about that? Seeing some thumbs up. Alrighty. James, you had a kind of a takeaway. Go for it.
Oh, I thought it was interesting, and I'm curious how we can try to implement that more of like that asymmetric style of involvement, because some people are going to know more than other people, because it's, you're not targeting at-risk students for failing, you're targeting everyone. So I thought it was interesting how you talked about, singling someone out as maybe like the leader if they know more, or varying, not necessarily, because whenever we did like a group activity in another class, it was always, okay, each person speaks 3 times, and it's a rigid thing of fairness and not taking into account their, all their knowledge coming in.
Yeah, and we'll have lots of different types of students in session. So there may be some students that like literally never want to talk, and students who only want to talk and try and take over sessions. So there's lots of different ways to kind of, I can think of as combat that, but I don't like that word. But to kind of help get everybody kind of more equally involved, whether that be like intentionally pairing people up, or, sometimes we've done it where like, we're like, all right, I am so glad like talking with students who are like those people who know all the answers and like being like, I'm so glad you know these, but let's give some other people another shot. Or, all right, today you get 5 answers, choose them wisely, like like that kind of thing. Or I think one of my favorites is always just like intentionally pairing people. Madeline, I know you had your hand up for a takeaway.
Oh, I was gonna say, I think these tools, they not only help students, but I think the facilitators as well, because we might not be as confident as other students. Some new material might come in for a course, and it kind of just allows the instructor to not have or the facilitator not to have so much pressure on them. And I think it's like all of them are good tools, not just for students, but for facilitators as well.
100%. That leads me to my last kind of point that I wanted to make sure that we make. I'm gonna try and go quickly so we make sure we have our full time for the closing. But Larab is like a chef's kiss kind of example of like a facilitator utilizing the 3 elements. And so we just wanted to make sure that you all are like good and understand that like we are not expecting perfection. Like Larab said, like she pointed out herself, like there were like, I noticed this at least one thing that I didn't do, and y'all were able to point out some instances where you may have done something a little differently. Like nobody is going to be perfect when it comes to the 3 elements, especially like starting off. But that is one of the like most beautiful things about SI is like we understand that like we are not expecting perfection. Perfection isn't real. It's an unattainable goal. And so like that is not something that we expect of y'all. But it is one of the like my favorite things about SI is like it is that safe place to fail and make mistakes. Just like we create that safe place for our students to come and make mistakes in like this safe environment. Like it's the same for y'all. Like, we'll be giving you feedback and giving you ideas on how we think you could grow and develop in the 3 elements. But it definitely is a safe place to try new things, or that be trying a new activity or trying to implement more. Go on an adventure with our theme, go on an adventure of like trying to grow and develop in like specific areas. And that's why like the leadership team and admin team, we're here to support you in those adventures and in that growth. And just knowing that like it's not always going to be an easy growth. It's not going to be something that necessarily comes naturally. Even now I have to be like, Oscar, your wait time was trash in that biweekly. Like, you know what I like, like it's not, it's a continual growth and development process. But we're here to help you reach that growth and not seek out that perfection. And we're going to help you celebrate those successes when you do. It might be a success for you, might be like waiting 3 seconds instead of not waiting the full like 5 to 7. We'll talk, it'll be a very individualized, but just know we are not expecting perfection from y'all. And we are excited to get to see the growth and development in your 3 elements as we come and observe your sessions and give you some feedback.
This is,
yeah, go for it, Tiffany.
it's probably like, well, I'll just say it. So would it be defeating the purpose if you tell the students, hey, there's these 3 elements, so if I'm not answering you right away, it's okay, I'm trying to help you, not rely on me, or like to encourage them in that way? Or is that not a good idea? Is it kind of like giving the secret away and then not fulfilling the purpose of the reason why you use it? I'm just trying to think if I were in there and if I got awkward feeling and like I'm just staring at them and they're insecure, and then I feel bad. Like
100%. That was a great question. And I think Elise sometimes shares the story. Elise, fun facts, was one of my students, and that is a mistake I made. I didn't necessarily like explain like, hey, I'm not going to necessarily answer. And so a lot of times you'll see like if you don't kind of give that explanation and give the why behind it, like I mentioned earlier, we're pretty big on our whys, why we're doing things. If you don't kind of give that and explain it, these aren't things that come natural. Like students, like in the world we live in, they're expecting that instant gratification, and we're trying to like break that dependency cycle. They're expecting that dependency cycle. So there's going to be this frustration, this tension, but like taking the time, and sometimes we'll kind of, you'll get to see a little bit of an example of this in our mock session that we're going to do tomorrow, because we have a script for it. But you'll be able to have that conversation with your students and be able to explain like, hey, this is why I'm doing it, and this is how it's going to help you in the long run.
Okay,
So
good.
definitely encouraged to do that.
Yeah. And then I was thinking I would encourage them like to make mistakes. Like I thought that's a really good one, because I think a lot of people just struggle because they're so afraid of what people are going to think. That's how I used to be. I don't know. Anyways.
Justin.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, real quick, Justin. I would also add something that we look like with everything that we do in session. Number one, no, it does not need to be a secret. It's not a secret. We should be communicating why these things are important and how it's making them become better learners. Overall, I think when I think of SI, I think my main goal is through collaboration, we're teaching them to be independent learners. That's our whole goal, is for them to be able to learn skills, learn content, but also the skills that come with it, for them to then be able to go home and do these things on their own, or form study groups on their own, that they don't need like a leader kind of working them through. So we're teaching them how to become independent learners. And every one of the elements, every one of the 3 elements is pushing them toward becoming independent learners. It's breaking that dependency cycle. It's getting them away from like focusing on having one person be the end all be all of that knowledge, and getting them confident in themselves and other resources that they can use to get there. So, and I think that's really important to also communicate with them as well. That's what the goal is. It's getting you to become independent so that you have confidence. You're not looking to me. That's what the elements are there for. Justin?
You'll also want to make sure that you do get comfortable at least early on. They will be quiet and they will stare at you while during that wait time. You're just gonna have to learn to be okay with it. It'll get better as the semester goes on, but that's definitely like where things will start, at least in my experience, I should say.
Alrighty, I am gonna go ahead and turn it over to Brett. Brett, are you here? You're ready for the closing? There's so many people. I think I saw a thumbs
Yeah,
up.
I'm good. Do you
Perfect.
have the you want to share the screen or you want me to?
If you have it pulled up, that would be great. I don't have it currently pulled up, but I can pull it up real quick if you need me to.
Yeah, give me 1 second to pull it up. All right, I got it. All right, so we're gonna do a think, pair, share activity for the closing day. So I want all of y'all to do is take a few minutes just to look over these questions and come up with the answers in your head. And then after that, we're gonna stick you in a breakout room for a couple minutes with another person and allow y'all to discuss that. Oscar, are the breakout rooms ready yet? Or
Yes.
All right, cool. All right, so now what we're gonna do is we're gonna assign y'all into breakout rooms with 1 or 2 other people, and then we're gonna give you a couple minutes to discuss the questions that are here and formulate an answer that y'all both agree on. And then after that, we're gonna bring you back on into the main room, and then we'll have a group discussion, and I'll ask for volunteers to answer the questions. All right, Oscar, you good to?
Open the rooms just now.
All right, cool.
Alrighty. So Brett, you just let me know when you are ready to pull them back.
All right, yeah, I'm gonna give them about 3-ish minutes and then bring them back. We might go over by about like a couple minutes, but can they still see the questions, or do I need to type that out?
I do not think they can.
Okay, I'll type that out real quick.
Oscar,
Yes.
the session expectations, I think is something that we could go ahead and just mention to follow up from that last session we did with Larab. Because it talks about, it's for the participants, the session expectations, and it talks about those elements and different expectations. So I don't know if we have allotted time for that for new people at another point.
I don't think so, not unless we fit it into the
Like the admin training.
that what's it called?
Oh, Friday bi-weekly?
No, tomorrow we added it in professionalism, relationship building.
Yeah,
So
we
now-
might be able to. I can go ahead and mention it very, very quickly. at the
Yeah,
end.
and it should be on Teams, and I can kind of show them tomorrow during that run through where it is again on Teams. Be like, if you didn't look at it yesterday.
What are we talking about?
It's definitely on Teams under general. That's where I just pulled it up from. So
Are we talking about session expectations?
Yeah.
correct.
Okay. Yeah, and I just printed out kind of like a full community section of the manual, but it has the session expectations, but then we'll print out like the actual ones. Right, wasn't that the plan? Was that we would like actually be handing them like specific or like a stack of those, is that right?
Yes, to give to their students.
Yeah.
Yes. Brett, are you ready for me to close rooms? Because they'll have 60 seconds.
Yeah, I was about to ask.
Perfect. Closing rooms now.
This meeting is being recorded. It is being recorded.
Guys, is the recording in progress?
Yeah, don't you love that? Every time you come back, everybody's it just goes off.
Got a few more groups. Got 20 seconds left before they're automatically brought back. All righty, Brett. I think everybody should be back.
All right. Now that everyone's back, we're going to go ahead and move on to the first question. So just raise your hand, like use the reaction to raise your hand for the first one if you want to answer that. All right, Dylan.
Wasn't it made in like UMKC, I believe, University of Missouri, Kansas City, I think, whatever UMKC stands for, I believe.
All right, Tyler, what do you think it was?
Yeah, so essentially UMKC with 1973. He's right. That's it. Yeah, don't correct.
All right, well, let's see. And y'all are both correct. Supplemental instruction was founded in 1973 at the University of Missouri, Kansas City. All right, next question. What are the three elements? All right, Anna, you want to take this one?
I think the three elements were redirection, wait time 1 and 2, and check for understanding.
Well, let's see. The three elements are wait time, redirection, and check for understanding. So you are absolutely right. All right, time to go to the next one. What are the different components of an SI session and approximately how long are they supposed to be? All right, I saw Noah's hand first, so you go ahead, Noah.
I have the components of an SI session are the opening, which would be about 10 minutes long, the main 1 and 2, which would be about 15 minutes each, and then the closing, which is like 10 minutes long.
All right, what do you think, Harrison?
I agree.
All right, so let's see what the answer is. The components are opening, main 1, main 2, and closing. And the opening and closing are both 10 minutes and the main contents are 15 minutes, roughly. So that means both of y'all were exactly right. And I did put a note that says you can plan for a main 3, but that is optional. It's not required. All right, and last question. Why is the following sentence not a good check for understanding? Does that make sense? I do not know which one of y'all had your hand up, so I'm just going to call on Aiden because his is at the top of the list.
The reason it's not a good check for understanding is because you can just say yes and move on. You would probably want to ask a question that the answer would demonstrate how well they know the material.
Okay, so if we were going to do something like that, Kat, how do we do that?
Instead of like, does that make sense? You could say, what do you think about their answer? Or could you describe that in a different way or something like that?
Yeah, y'all are both exactly right. Those are both good, or those examples that you gave are both good alternatives to does that make sense? Because a student could, as Aiden said, just say, yeah, that makes sense. When in reality, they're just trying to move on, not wanting to have to think about that. So that's all I got. So I'm going to give this back over to Oscar or Emily.
All righty. Well, everybody, that was day 1 of training. You did it. You made it through. I know Zoom fatigue is real. So I very much, like I said earlier, appreciate all of the interaction and Mike's camera usage today. It did not go unnoticed, and we're very appreciative of that. So yeah, just as we close out today, thank you. I know we went a few minutes over, so appreciate all of you who are able to stay over. But definitely be sure to check that training page. That day one has all of the homework tasks that Sarah went over in the UNG Connect training. On there, there is also a Google survey to get some feedback for us about day one of training, how you thought it went, and kind of where you're feeling about that. So be sure to complete that as well. It is completely anonymous, so feel free to be as honest as you would like to be. And then the only other thing I would say is tomorrow training on the Gainesville campus in person. Excited for it. And just be sure to don't forget to bring your I-9 documents so that we can take them to HR, because we have that scheduled in our training day.
Also,
yep.
I would say please bring some form of technology. We'll continue to use the website throughout training. So, and we'll need it. So if you can, please do bring some form of technology to training tomorrow.
And I think we're going to stay on for anybody who has any questions. But if you don't have any questions, y'all are free to peace on out of here and enjoy the rest of your day.
Awesome job, everyone. You got all the foundations. It's all done. Now you just get to practice. Does anyone have a question that they need to ask privately, or is it available to the group? Or should we, Sarah, should we do some breakout rooms to kind of filter questions?
Yeah, we can do that if that works.
Oscar, can you throw me over into a breakout room and send somebody to me?
Yes, real quick, Anna, if you're still here, to answer your question, HR is going to want the real documents. All righty. I'm assuming people with hands raised have questions.
I have a question.
All righty, I'm gonna start. Oh, Lord.
Yeah, Oscar, you can send me to a breakout room too.
How do I just delete breakout rooms? That's the real question.
And then Oscar, you can answer questions in the main room if you'd like. Sarah, do you want to stop recording?
Yeah.